What's my problem with art schools? First things first, why is this not 4K? The heck? I also am on baby duty. My baby is passed out. I mean, I'm always on baby duty, but usually my wife's here to help me out, especially if I'm recording or something. But she's out dancing, doing some salsa dancing. So if I have to abruptly stop the video, so be it. So art schools, let's talk about them. Do I hate art schools? Yes. Just kidding. No, of course not. I think art schools are great. They can be a great tool. Um, do I think that many of the art schools are not as, not as advertised? I don't know. I don't think that any single form of education is going to be the only way to learn something. I think there's lots of really fascinating and great ways to learn stuff. Oh, I'm gonna go hard with this image. But I do have ultimately a problem kind of with the paradigm of art schools and what people think is happening and why it's just not true, you know? And if you are a person who's listening now who is going to an art college or in a very expensive art school, then hopefully this video will speak to you and give you a lot to think about and a lot to work towards. So the first thing that I will comment on is that I don't think that art schools inherently are a bad idea. And there are obviously some schools that are better than others. There are going to be some schools that absolutely have better resources, better educators, better everything and anything that you could think of. And a lot of great people graduate from schools, and a lot of interesting people, you know, come out of school, and it's wonderful. I have made literally lifelong friends this last week that I was gone. I was literally hanging out with them. I was hanging out with many of these people, and it was a wonderful experience. And part of me kind of speaks to that and how that's really wonderful. And that's one of the things that makes me love that I went to school in the first place. But what I think ends up happening, why people have a hard time with art schools, is that, or at least why I have a hard time with it, is that when you graduate, there's this kind of implied understanding, this implied sensibility that what you have done is now good enough to get you work. There's this kind of like unspoken misunderstanding because the reality is you are absolutely not guaranteed work when you graduate. And if a college tells you, yeah, we have like 95% placement, some of these colleges, like the one that I went to, that ended up becoming entirely a scam. So yeah, we have like 90% placement. So that means 9 out of 10 people who go to this college will get a job. And that sounds awesome. But when you read the fine print, they include people who may work at retail or McDonald's. Like they're working after college. It's a technicality. And some of these schools may not even say that. They'll just, say, we've had some of the best graduates in our school, like, and they went off to do all these wonderful things. Like this person worked on this movie, this person worked on this game, but then when you really do the crunch the numbers, if you think about it in a kind of simple way, if you think of it as, oh, if 100 people went to the school and 5 of which ended up doing all the things that the schools said, like, look at this alumni, but it's like 5 out of the 100, that's also kind of misleading. You understand kind of where I'm going with this? And you know what I want to do? Oh, I want this to be way more dynamic. And I think I'm just fighting against the current. So let me just start over and just make it more dynamic. Side tangent on that. Usually, if I'm painting something within the first few minutes, I can tell whether the painting is going well or not. And I either will make major changes to the design or I will restart. And in this instance, I decided to restart because I think I was just mindlessly drawing. But I've been in this stint of like I want to do more dynamic sketches. I've been doing a lot more illustrative work, and it's been really exciting. And so I'm like, oh, I should practice dynamic poses whenever I get a chance. I probably should get some reference too. That will help a lot. In fact, I should start doing way more studies. That's probably the best strategy here. Anyway, so there's a bit of that, right? There's a bit of like misleading people with statistics. There's this one wonderful statistic that I always like to share with people when talking about statistics, when talking about numbers, because humans are actually pretty bad at it. As a species, we're not really good at understanding numbers, especially at large scale. There's this great example, just demonstrating context, how when you look at the amount of people who go to hospital A, let's say 100 people go to hospital A, and out of that, 30 people end up dying. And if you then bring in hospital B, and then you find out if 100 people go to that hospital, 10 people die. So it's essentially 30% to 30% likely to die versus 10% likely to die. So with just those numbers, you might suspect that hospital B, the second hospital, the one with 10%, is a better hospital to go to. But in reality, you need more information. And so hospital A then proves to be safer because what you'll find out is that hospital A is actually like urgent care or emergency hospitalization. So everybody and anybody who goes to this hospital is going for urgent care. They're going for something really important. It's not just your run of the mill, I got a cold, you know? And where versus hospital B isn't. It's just a kind of a general hospital. And they have a emergency room. And then when you find out, if you just look at that number, like, okay, 10 people tend to go to the hospital in like 10 people who go to hospital B end up being the kinds of people who need emergencies. 10 out of 10 people die. So it's 100% death rate. Or we can make it less of that. Let's say it's like 20 people end up going to an emergency room. So then it's 50%. So then you'll realize, oh, so that hospital is a better hospital. Then you add other context, like hospital A might be in a different country. So it's not even on the cards, or maybe it costs a lot more, you know? Maybe it's the equipment, maybe it's the doctors. Like then you start adding all of these other variables, then it starts to paint a bigger picture. And I think with art schools, I like to try to help people really understand that. It's like, well, what are you trying to achieve when you go to art school? You know, if you're going to art school to try to learn, and try to get good as an artist, I think that it could work okay. But then when you look at the price tag, I mean, that might be too expensive, depending on the school you go to. You understand? It might not be worth the squeeze because it's just so expensive just to learn how to do good art. If you're going to one of these art colleges to build a portfolio, this is where I would say, even with the cost, this seems like a terrible strategy. Going to an art school may very well make you a portfolio, and I'm doing that in quotations, but it might not make you a portfolio that will get you the kind of work that you want. You understand what I'm saying? Because, you know, D's can get degrees. You can pass and graduate a college with minimal effort. You don't actually need to potentially be like a grade A student. You can just be a mediocre one and graduate. And I've seen that. I've seen many of my colleagues and classmates absolutely follow that path and ultimately have nothing to show for it at the end of it, which was unfortunate for them. And this is why I always talk about stuff like art debt and trying to stay focused and building your portfolio and focusing on quality and letting people know you have quality. These things I constantly and almost forever talk about, and I help people get through because it is really the greatest strategy that one can do. I think that whenever people focus on all of these secondary, tertiary things, when they rely on kind of an external tool to potentially give them a shot at the big times, but they're not really focused on kind of the core tenets of what it actually takes to get to where you need to go. This is when people have a lot of grief in their journey. This is what happens when a lot of people graduate from art school and months after art school feel like they have no opportunities, and they're bewildered because they spent all this money, they spent all this time, they thought it was available to them, and then they start to kind of fall victim to kind of narratives that the industry is in shambles and that there is no spot for them. They start to kind of push the onus onto some external factor that has nothing to do with them, and more importantly, they'll never have control over. You'll never have control over of the diet and the diets of the consumer and the maneuvers of these businesses. They'll maneuver and do what they ought to do, and the consumers will purchase and buy into things that they want to buy, and it's ever changing and ever evolving. But what isn't is quality talent being sought after. This is almost always a huge deal. They're always finding people who can essentially do incredible work, but more than that, just know what it means to do incredible work, how to do incredible work, how to become a great artist, and what it means to be a great artist. And a lot of art schools just don't do this. They kind of teach in a way too that doesn't necessarily even prepare you for the work environment. It doesn't teach you what it means to do kind of the jobs that are at hand. You know what I mean? Like they'll kind of have this structure that's a bit forgiving. Feedback isn't as aggressive or brutal. And I mean, I'm using the word brutal, but it's not. It doesn't have to be that way. It's brutal in the sense that you'll be told kind of what you need to work on, and if you just don't do it, then you'll just get fired, or you'll be let go. It's really brutal only in that sense that it is hardcore. And I don't know if a lot of educational environments teach this effectively, or more importantly, prepare people effectively. And this is kind of where I'm coming from. This is the thing that I've been noticing a lot of people who do get gigs. They don't actually understand these things. And it's like you don't really learn this in a school, usually. There are some schools that do their best to try to simulate these situations, and I love that, I think one of my colleagues, like over at Brainstorm, do a pretty good job of this usually. There's some other schools online that I think do a really good job of this. There are also like popular YouTubers that are like Artwad is like one of my favorites that kind of demonstrates a bit of that kind of hardcore, like, hey, listen, man, like get up off your ass, like you need to start drawing more, but in a way that kind of is very encouraging and very meaningful. It feels like there's a path to glory. Mark Bernay, I think, is also really great about this. He's a good buddy of mine. And there's others. There's definitely more. And including myself, I think my form of education, specifically my mentorships, explicitly my mentorships, are not necessarily portfolio builders exclusively. It's really to try to help artists like become artists and respect the challenge of that, and help them grow on an individual basis And that's what that's made for. It's more of like a real safe haven to help artists kind of be more in tune with their work, be more in tune with what it means to even draw often, you know. It's very forgiving. It's a safe space. And it's it's a tool that I try to use to get people to draw and paint a lot more. That's why that exists. But I've been talking about this in a couple other videos in the past about building a proper course where it's like, this is about building portfolios. And to even get in, you need to have a portfolio review to see if you're even someone I think could build a proper portfolio that could potentially get you a job. So what that means is that at the end of this, I am trying to get like 90% placement, you know, but not at like McDonald's, but like actually in the biz, and do my best to see if I can make that happen. There are studios that do this. I know Art Bully does this pretty good job. They do this in other countries, though. They do it like in developing countries. They'll build out schools, teach folks in these other countries to basically create a bit of a cheaper workforce, but also build an industry in that nation, which is really cool. You know, um, but it's like quite literally trying to teach artists to do the type of jobs that we do, which is great. And for me, my biggest complaints about art school is the same complaint I have like with public school, which is the pacing in which public school teaches. It's in a way, it's taught in such a way, or it's structured in such a way that it doesn't really allow people to be paced effectively, and pay attention to their pace. What I mean by this is that if you don't finish lesson one, like if you didn't understand whatever was taught in the first week, well, too bad, we're moving on to the second week. And I think that by nature leaves a lot of people behind. And it's unfortunate because it's, you know, you want to be able to teach a productive and progressive course, right? You want to keep progressing to learn more and more. But that doesn't, it's not such a conducive environment to allow people to genuinely grow the way they ought to be growing. But it makes sense from like why these art schools do this, because if they didn't, if they truly just dropped people off, or sorry, they left people behind, or hey, you know, you cannot advance, into the next semester, or you can't advance in the next block of education until you truly pass this stuff. You know, I think like sciences do this. Like you can't like actually join certain sciences if you don't have like a high GPA or high scoring with like certain maths. Like you can't be an astrophysicist if you don't know basic physics. Like you have to learn basic physics before you can even begin that. Where in art schools, and a lot of colleges in general, to be fair to art schools, will be like, you didn't get enough, we'll put you into the next segment. Where art schools should be treating like more of like a science. Like, hey, if you can't draw human figure, then you can't advance to the, you know, character design courses, like the intermediate character design courses. You have to be able to draw a naked person pretty well. And the reason why art schools are not that rigid is because, you know, you're a paying customer. It's for profit, right? And you want to make sure the customer is right. You want to make sure the customer feels like they're getting their money's worth, even though they are being indirectly lied to, you know? And again, if I was to build a portfolio building course, like it would absolutely be one of those things where I probably wouldn't make as much money as like if I would just to teach my mentorships, because it's like very simple and it's very pure. I probably will only have 3 or 4 artists at a time. I can't imagine I would have more than that, you know? And I can imagine like my mentorship could be a road to that class. But yeah, because there's just not a lot of people that are in that stage. Usually it takes a while. And usually if there are people that are like right in the crossroads of that, they're probably already getting some work, so they don't necessarily need to take my course. It's really for a very specific group of people who I feel um, are close, but maybe just need a bit of a push, and we're working on building a portfolio. You know, um, or I would have to create like a much longer form course where I would have to teach over a span of several years. Sorry, several years, several months for these individuals to really get there. But I am not a proper full online course. Like that's not my jam of education right now, and it's not what I want to do full time. I love teaching, but I don't want to like run a quote unquote like curriculum based school structure. That's just not what I want to do. Um, but it's what I would imagine I would have to do if I wanted to absolutely build this out. For people to really get a lot out of it. And again, you got to keep in mind that, like, even if I built that long form course, there would still be a bit of a portfolio review. You have to demonstrate that you have actually some ambition, so that I can make sure you succeed genuinely. And then you also have to probably in that course, like it would probably be pretty pricey, like a lot of these art schools. But the difference is that it probably wouldn't be nearly as pricey as some of these art schools, but it would still be pricey over a long term. And again, it's one of those things that's just a small pool of people who have that kind of money, who have that kind of time, you know? And so I find that it's probably best to teach the way that I've been teaching, which is through mentorships to kind of give people principles and foundation to work from that will allow them to evolve into the great artists that they ought to become, because they don't have to take lots of my mentorships. They can really only take one, and they'll get all the right tools that I think will help them moving forward. And then there's the the thing that I'm doing now, just putting out art videos for free, just advice and tutorials that I do for small costs. Like this is pretty useful. And again, there's an ungodly amount of artists out there that are doing a great job of teaching all these wonderful things. It's just not consolidated well. So do I hate art schools though? Like, no, man. I think art schools can be very useful. Like, again, networking is probably one of the biggest factors. Again, I made so many close friends that, oh yeah, I got this gig. I don't know if I could talk about it just yet. I think in a week or two, I probably can. But I got this gig and all my friends were working at this company. I was just messaging them and I was just like, hey, how you guys doing? It was super cool. And a lot of these people, like I said, like we all went to college together. It's been a fantastic affair, and this is just a powerful selling point for art schools. But for instance, I'm not in art school anymore. So how am I going to continue to network with these new and improved artists that are coming out of the woodwork? Well, first of all, I take my prestige and just meet people online all the time and say hello. I still do that and try to expand my network. I made a bunch of young, upcoming great artists as homies. I was actually trying to work out with a couple of them, but I didn't do it last week just because I realized I just didn't have as much time as I thought I did. I just needed to just hang out with homies the entire time. I am setting up a sketch group. I have another sketch group coming up in Orlando this coming week, or coming 2 weeks after 4th of July. So that's going to be exciting. What else is going on? That expands my friendships. Oh yeah, I just make friends at events too. I go to lots of events and then try to make friends there and just get their contacts and just stay vocal, stay connected to these people. And so I think that because I'm not in art school, it doesn't mean that I can't find ways to engage with people. I find all sorts of ways because it's incredibly important. And I try to do it in person because I think that's just way more valuable. I love myself Discord. I love myself, social media whenever you use it effectively. But it's just like social media itself is also just this place where lots of toxic personalities tend to thrive as well. But when you're in person, it's just very unlikely to run into this kind of toxic environment. You know what I mean? It's just not as common. It's way more common to just everybody's just chilling, having a good time, having great conversations, in person. And so this is why I love building our communities in person. And I do believe that that's kind of a forever growing system of affairs for me whenever I build art communities. But anyway, should you go to art school? This is a pretty big question that lots of people ask themselves. First question I would say is if you have enough money, then absolutely go. Why not? Make those connections. If you're a rich bastard, just do it. I was not. I encourage most people who are not to go. Should you take online courses? Like what about arts, like online art schools? Absolutely. And I don't even just mean that because of mine. I'm saying like there are actually quite a lot of really wonderful art education classes just online. Usually it's with people that are working individuals or incredibly skilled people that have the generosity of sharing their knowledge. Like this type of stuff is actually great value. I think for me, when I was learning, I learned a lot from people like this. I learned a lot from people who were just doing the thing. And I was just listening to them talk about how to do the thing. This was by far one of the biggest positives, of just like taking online courses and going to workshops, was like literally listening to the greatest people to ever do it talk about how they do it. YouTube is awesome. Cheap tutorials are awesome because it's just like, it's free or affordable. And whenever you have cash, books are incredible. Great consolidation of knowledge, especially older art books. Be careful of these newer ones that are clearly just AI slop that will teach you nothing. It's fucking lies. You're not learning from anybody who's giving you any meaningful insights, just pictures that look cool. Like get books that have words in them from like people that, again, were the greatest to ever do it. But like going to a art school that costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars to attend, that you'll have to pay for your entire life. Like even my buddy who passed away, my buddy Rob that I mentioned in previous videos, he still has college debt even after his death. I think his wife might get some of that stuff essentially forgiven because he's not around anymore. But being as the current administration and for-profit schools are always out here trying to make their money, these creditors, I'm not convinced that it's going to be an easy peasy ride. You know what I mean? So that's unfortunate, but it is true. So yeah, you don't want that. I still have friends, like I said earlier, that have graduated nearly 10 to 15 years ago that are still paying off their student loans, and they work for incredible game studios and film projects, and they're still out here paying tons and tons of cash. So yeah, just be very wise to this. Like this is a new world. There's a lot more ways to learn. Try to learn all sorts of different ways. Anyway, I'm gonna leave you guys to it. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys in my next video.